Germany. Between medieval castles and half-timbered houses, enchanting mountain lakes and mysterious forests, a road trip through Germany is like a fairy tale writing itself. In the land of poets and thinkers, history comes alive. Follow us on our journey as we experience the wonders of the country we call home. Our road trip through Germany started in Dresden, the country's most beautiful city. Nicknamed Florence on the Elbe for its Baroque architecture and many museums, Dresden's Old Town abounds in richly decorated buildings. For centuries, the city was the royal residence of the kings of Saxony. Some of these rulers were lavish spenders, who ruined the state's finances but endowed the city with unrivaled cultural delights. Honoring these past sovereigns is the Fürstenzug, or the Procession of Princes, a 102-meter-long mural made of porcelain tiles. The current splendor of Dresden is all the more astonishing, considering that it was bombed to bits at the end of the Second World War. But having risen like a phoenix from the ashes, the city shines brightly once again. A powerful symbol of the rebirth of Dresden is the Frauenkirche. This church was only a pile of rubble at the end of the war. Following the German reunification, it was rebuilt using both new sandstone as well as the original building blocks. This is why the church's outer facade is both light and dark, uniting past and present, and thus creating a beacon of hope for a more peaceful future. Leaving Dresden behind, we headed east until arriving in the Elbsandsteingebirge. This sandstone mountain range has an incredible geological history, having formed millions of years ago from deposits on the seabed. Through physical and chemical erosion as well as biological processes, the sandstone was constantly molded, taking on a variety of shapes. Today, large parts of this landscape are protected as Sächische Schweiz National Park. The somewhat unusual name Saxon Switzerland was coined by two Swiss artists who visited the area in the 18th century and found surprising similarities to their home. Of course, the Saxon Switzerland lacks the majestic mountain peaks of its namesake. However, it does provide some truly astonishing scenery. The most popular place to visit is the Bastei. This rock formation rises almost 200 meters above the Elbe. Aside from the view, most visitors come to see the Basteibrücke, a sandstone bridge that is one of the most iconic landmarks of Germany. Another highlight is the Königstein. The history of this hilltop fortress goes back hundreds of years. Throughout this period, the fortifications were repeatedly modified until the castle was considered nigh unconquerable. Located directly above a bend in the Elbe, the view from Königstein is formidable. Whereas both Bastei and Königstein are well frequented, the national park also offers peace and seclusion. Early in the morning, the only sound are the rustle of the leaves and the singing of the birds. Most of the local hiking trails are family-friendly and easy to follow. Some others require a slightly more adventurous spirit. Oftentimes, ladders provide access to hidden rock plateaus. One such set of stairs leads to a viewpoint overlooking the Schrammsteine. Even more exhilarating is the climb to Winterstein. The most challenging trails combine hiking with climbing.
So sieht das ganz einfach aus.
Aha.
These trails should not be attempted by those with a fear of heights or overly sweaty hands for that matter. If you have some climbing experience, you will have a great time though. This is especially true as the Sächsischen Switzerland is the most well-known rock climbing region in Germany. Ascending these sandstone pillars is considered difficult even among experienced climbers. Only natural hand and footholds may be used, while the application of chalk is strictly prohibited. But regardless of hiking, cycling or climbing, the national park abounds in natural beauty. After more than 3 days of exploring this wonderful region, it was time for us to hit the road. As we drove southwest along the Czech border, we passed many colorful rapeseed fields. Generally speaking, large parts of the German countryside are dominated by agriculture, but luckily pockets of nature remain. Continuing onwards, we drove up to the highest point in eastern Germany. With an elevation of 1215 meters, the Fichtelberg towers above an undulating landscape of fields and forests. In summer, this is a popular area to go for a walk, whereas in winter, there's enough snow for skiing. Having previously left the Saxon Switzerland, we now made our way to the Franconian Switzerland. One of the most characteristic villages of the region is Tüchersfeld, a small settlement that has been built on and around a number of rocks. Larger but equally as charming is Bamberg. Recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the majority of the historic city centre has been preserved. Bamberg's most iconic landmark is its old town hall, which was built directly above the river. "130 kilometers further south, we reach the banks of the Danube. This river originates in southwest Germany and crosses a total of 10 countries on its almost 3,000-kilometer long journey. An especially pretty part of the Danube can be found near Weltenburg, where the water gushes through a narrow canyon. To get a closer look, we hopped on a small boat and swiftly drifted downstream. It did not take long until we passed rock formations on both sides of the river. Interestingly, it was not the Danube that carved out this particular gorge, but one of its tributaries. Geology aside, this section of the river is exceptionally scenic. Following the river downstream, we arrived in Regensburg. Here visitors will come upon several splendid churches and other historic buildings. The most extravagant of these is the Regensburg Cathedral, a masterpiece of Gothic architecture. Another striking monument in the area is the Walhalla. Its purpose is to serve as a hall of fame for outstanding personalities of the German tongue. The outdoor area is mostly used for another reason though, to watch the sunset over the Danube. Heading east towards the Czech border, we made our way to the Bayrischer Wald. This large woodland has a length of more than 100 kilometers and parts of it have been protected as a national park since 1970. Numerous hiking trails lead to mountain peaks which afford sweeping views of the surrounding landscape. Along the way, there is a good chance to meet the critters that call this forest home. While trees certainly dominate the image of the region, there are also lakes, as well as bogs. A mosaic of smaller and larger pools is fringed by typical wetland vegetation, such as peat moss and bog birch trees. Boardwalks provide access to this part of the landscape, which is a true haven of peace. Significantly busier but equally worth a visit is the Großer Abersee. This lake is a relic of the Ice Age when large parts of Germany were covered by massive glaciers. An easy walking trail leads around the lake, which is set in an impressive mountain bowl and surrounded by dense forest. Unlike in most other parts of Germany, forestry was never possible here, which means that some of these trees are more than 400 years old. On the lake's western end, a large floating moss layer has formed. Over time, these vegetation mats become so stable that even trees can grow on them. Our onward journey took us back to the banks of the Danube. Before the river crosses into Austria, it passes through one more town. With its countless historic buildings, Passau is a very worthwhile place to visit. Moreover, the Danube is not the only river that flows through the city. Inn, Ilz and Danube meet here, earning Passau the nickname City of Three Rivers. Further south, we drew near a part of the country we had been very eager to visit. Ahead of us, we beheld the majestic peaks of the Alps. This mountain range is most often associated with Austria and Switzerland, but it also stretches along the southern border of Germany. During our visit in May, most of the higher peaks were still covered under a blanket of snow. But if anything, this further enhanced their splendor. The crown jewel of the Alps around Berchtesgaden is the Königssee. This fjord-like mountain lake is surrounded by steeply rising peaks. To truly experience the beauty of this landscape, we decided to go on a boat excursion across the lake.
Water is fantastic. This is one of the cleanest lakes in Europe. It's absolutely drinking water quality. You can try it, you can drink it, but I don't drink this water. The reason is I live in Bavaria. I don't like water, I like beer and schnapps.
Before long, we arrived at the Echo Wall. Here, the sheer rock is known to create a fabulous echo, which is demonstrated to visitors by playing a Flügelhorn. Shortly afterwards, we reached St. Bartholomew, a venerable pilgrimage church with 2 onion domes. Our boat trip wasn't over yet though, as we continued towards the lake's end. Disembarking, we were now in the heart of the national park. A short, well-trodden path through the forest leads to Obersee, a spellbinding mountain lake. The clarity of the lake's water is entrancing, and its setting among mighty peaks awe-inspiring. The icing on the cake is Germany's highest waterfall, which cascades down the opposite mountain flank. To get closer to this spectacle, we followed a rocky trail along the shore. This opened up many new perspectives, each one surpassing the former. Falling 470 meters, Wimbachklamm is by far the highest waterfall in Germany. The fall is particularly impressive during spring and early summer. A hiking trail leads to the foot of the cliff, but the best view is from a little further away, where you can see the waterfall in all its grandeur. The surrounding scenery was no less beautiful. Amidst the bubbling streams and magnificent rock faces, we instantly lost our hearts to this part of Germany. This sentiment was further intensified when we came upon the local wildlife. The Alpine Chamois is a goat antelope that calls steep mountain flanks their home. Usually, these animals are very skittish, but in the national park, we experience them as surprisingly relaxed. When alarmed though, they are extremely nimble, even in treacherous terrain. During the summer, chamois spend most of their time in high alpine meadows, where they feed on grasses, leaves and shrubs. Their brown coat blends well with the surrounding landscape, except for when they cool down on fields of snow. Females and their young live in herds of 15 to 30 animals, whereas males are solitary. Both sexes have horns which are distinctly curved back at the tip. After spending more than an hour among these lovely creatures, it was time to head back. But our exploration of the area had just begun. Driving up the Roßfeld Panorama Road, we climbed up to almost 1600 meters above sea level. The majority of the road is fringed by trees, but the topmost section affords a remarkable view of the Hoher Göll. Whereas the area around Berchtesgaden is mostly famous for its mountains and lakes, there are also spectacular gorges. One of these is the Wimbachklamm. Crossing several bridges and climbing up many sets of stairs, a hiking trail leads deep into the canyon. The reward for passing through this river-carved gorge is the crystal clear water of the Almbach. This bubbling stream cuts through the rock in a series of delightful waterfalls. After some time of walking and even crossing a tunnel, the landscape started to widen again. Here we came upon another large waterfall that dropped down more than 100 meters. Surpassing this waterfall spectacle, however, is the nearby Wimbachklamm. A wooden walkway provides easy access to the most dramatic section of the gorge. The canyon, which was carved by a small but powerful stream, is not only a highlight because of the turbulent water. Even more sublime are the numerous small waterfalls. The view of the water flowing down the moss-covered rock face is unlike any other in Germany. Wimbachklamm, it is only a short drive to the Hintersee. For centuries, this lake has inspired painters and poets to create works of art. Particularly, the lake's clear water is extraordinary. Combined with stunning mountain scenery, the Hintersee is, to us, the most scenic lake in all of Germany. Towering above this aquatic jewel is the mighty Hochkalter. A hiking trail leads up the side of the mountain until culminating on an alpine plateau. At around 1,700 meters above sea level, there was still a lot of snow. This place is really special because behind me you can see the Kar Glacier, which is also known as the Blue Ice. And it might not be the most spectacular of its kind, but it is the northernmost glacier of the Alps, which makes it a really interesting place to visit. But aside from all that, this entire mountain bowl is absolutely staggering, and frankly, nothing I would have expected to find in Germany. In May, most of the mountain slopes were still painted white, but during a second visit in late summer, the landscape looked entirely different. It is only then that the true dimensions of the glacier can be determined. Looking at this sad remnant, it is highly likely that the ice will disappear in the next few years. With the snowfields fully melted, it was now possible to climb to the highest peak of the massif. What is really important to understand about this hike, as well as the Watzmann crossing over there, is that these are not Sunday walks in the park. These are seriously dangerous alpine trails that even require a bit of scrambling or climbing at points, and that means that you should only attempt them with the right equipment and of course with the right weather, the right conditions, determination and the right level of fitness. If any of these do not apply to you, you should not come up here, because people die here every year, and frankly mountain rescue has a lot on their hands as it is, so don't be one of those needing to be rescued. Anyone thinking about scaling Hochkalter needs to be utterly unafraid of heights and extremely sure-footed. Some sections of the trail are highly exposed, where the placement of every single step is important. Other parts can only be overcome by using all four limbs. But the reward is not only the pride of having climbed such a prominent peak, it is also the sweeping vista of the surrounding landscape. One thing that equally must not be underestimated is the long way down. These very same rules also apply to the most prestigious alpine hike in Germany. It is just past 5:30 in the morning and I'm already drenched in sweat. And the reason for that is that I'm making my way up to the Watzmann, one of the most iconic peaks of Germany. And the so-called Watzmann crossing is one of the most strenuous hikes in the country, which is more than 20 kilometers long and features about 2,000 meters of elevation gain. So plenty of climbing and sweating ahead of me, but fingers crossed I'll make it safely to the top and especially safely back down. When attempting the Watzmann crossing, it is paramount to start early. This will ensure a maximum of daylight hours for a trail that takes even experienced hikers around 12 hours. It is possible to split the hike in two by staying in a mountain hut, but I decided to complete the crossing in a single day. The first summit of the massif is reached at Hochegg, a peak that already affords a wonderful view. Up to this point, the trail is still manageable for most, but at the side of the following ridgeline, many decide to turn back. Those carrying on must be prepared to face a lofty mountain crest. Some sections of the trail are secured with steel cables, but this is not a via ferrata. In short, this hike is a litmus test of the physical and mental strength of everyone attempting it. The highest point of the Watzmann is reached at Mittelspitze. 2,713 meters, the peak towers above all others in the area. The final peak along the ridge is the Zugspitze. Most hikers take an extended break here, not only to rest after a long climb, but also to enjoy the panorama. Eventually, it was time for us to leave this southeastern corner of Germany behind. However, we didn't get far before we came across a parade of vintage tractors. Once we had passed the tractors, we carried on to Frillensee, an almost translucent mountain lake surrounded by sheer rock walls. In comparison, the Wimbachklamm Chiemsee is not quite as pretty, but instead it is suitable for all kinds of boating. Making our way through the south of Germany, we passed several more lakes. Some of these were established as reservoirs, but most of them are of natural origin. One thing they share is that they are fed by clear streams. A truly extraordinary riverbed is that of the Rissbach. From an elevated vantage point, we enjoyed a breathtaking view of the valley. Following a toll road along a turquoise river, we continued westward until we caught sight of the Wetterstein Massif. This mountain group is home to 8 of the 10 highest peaks in Germany. For that reason, as well as its stunning lakes, the area is heavily frequented by tourists, which meant that we promptly ended up in a traffic jam. Once we had made it into the car park, we walked to the Zugspitze gondola. In late May, most hiking trails were still covered in snow, so instead of climbing the mountain, taking the gondola was both safer and more convenient. That way, we also got to enjoy a superb vista of the Eibsee. Only 10 minutes after setting out, we arrived at the summit station. At first, the view was somewhat veiled by clouds, but luckily they soon started to disperse, revealing the incredible grandeur of the landscape. The highest point of Germany is marked with a golden summit cross that stands at exactly 2,962 meters. Of course, we also paid a quick visit to Austria, as the peak marks the border between both countries. Most of the time, however, we simply stood on the viewing platform and soaked in the incredible scenery. The next day, the weather was very moody. Most of the landscape was buried under a thick layer of clouds. Fortunately, that did not bother us in the slightest when we visited the Höllentalklamm, a gorge that can be explored on an adventurous hiking trail. Similar to the gorges we had been to before, this one was cut into the rock by a turbulent stream. Unlike the other ones though, the trail through it was much more dramatic, as it was hewn straight into the rock. Large parts of the hike lead below rock overhangs or through spooky tunnels. Whenever not in a tunnel, there is a good chance that a waterfall is dropping down directly from above. Although the weather remained unpredictable for most of the day, we were happy to experience a memorable sunset. Not only were the mountains bathed in a soft golden light, but also the castle directly in front of us. From our camp, we looked upon none other than the world-renowned Schloss Neuschwanstein. This castle was built at the behest of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who felt the very understandable urge to escape the constraints of city life. Earning himself the nickname Fairy Tale King, Ludwig II commissioned the construction of several extravagant palaces. Neuschwanstein is certainly the most famous of all, not only because of its symbolic medieval architecture, but also due to its location at the foot of the Alps. Various vantage points offer different perspectives of the palace, which has become a global symbol of romanticism. While most visitors simply head up to the castle, far fewer find their way to the nearby Alpsee. Not only is the walk around the lake very pleasant, but it also offers great views of both Neuschwanstein as well as its sister castle Hohenschwangau. Taking a short break from the mountains, we headed inland to visit 3 historic cities. First up was München, which internationally is called Munich. This city is widely known for the Oktoberfest, its infuriatingly successful football club, and its grand architecture. The most unusual side of the city can be found in its large public park. Much of the Englischer Garten is rather quiet, but on the Eisbach, adrenaline reigns. Along this man-made river, an artificial wave is much loved by surfers. Most of the time the stream has a green-bluish color, but after heavy rains it turns a dull brown. That clearly did not stop the locals from turning up in large numbers. Surfers of all ages pitted themselves against the standing wave in a display of strength and balance. Stop along our inland journey was Augsburg. This city has a very long history dating back to Roman times. In fact, it was named after none other than the Roman Emperor Augustus. Of course, it also boasts a large cathedral, which was built more than 1,000 years ago. Not quite as old, but even taller, is the Ulmer Münster. With a height upwards of 161 meters, this is the tallest church in the world. On the inside, the stained glass windows were particularly lovely. Another building showcasing great artistry is the town hall. The entire facade is decorated with colorful murals that depict both biblical stories as well as elements of Roman and Greek mythology. Not far from Ulm, we visited the Blautopf. This natural spring is striking because of its unbelievably blue color. Emerging from a cave system in the karst landscape, the water is rich in nanoscale limestone particles. These small particles cause a physical effect of light scattering, which leads to the blue glow of the spring. Depending on the weather, the intensity of the color can differ, but it always remains a fabulous sight. Heading south again, we quickly found ourselves on winding mountain roads. Early the next morning, I was greeted by wonderful sunshine on my hike to the Schrecksee. This being an unusually cold May, I soon came upon the first fields of snow.
I might be a bit too early in the season because the trail has just disappeared under a big field of snow and I'm just navigating by GPS, but this has already been a challenging trail, but now it has become even more hazardous, so I gotta be really careful here. It definitely appears as if no one has walked this trail in a number of days because there are no footstep stairs on the snowfields, which means that I have to do all the digging myself, which is a very strenuous activity.
Finally, however, I arrived at the ridge, which luckily was almost entirely free of snow. The last obstacle before the peak of Rauhorn was an easy climbing section. The view from the mountaintop was highly impressive as it included waterfalls, valleys, lakes and pointed peaks. Following some more climbing along the ridge, the remainder of the hike to Schrecksee was very pretty. However, I soon discovered that the entire lake was still frozen and covered under a layer of snow. The only hint of its presence were icy blue veins of semi-frozen water. On very hot summer days, this lake is a popular place to go for a swim. And even on that day, with the lake still mostly frozen, some hikers were brave enough for an ice bath. Although it was tough to tear ourselves away from this mountain wonderland, it was eventually time to say farewell. Leaving the Alps westwards, we soon arrived at the shores of the Bodensee. Also known as Lake Constance, this body of water is shared between Germany, Austria and Switzerland. Due to its large size, the lake is well suited for all sorts of boat outings. Our favorite town along its shore was Meersburg. This charming city was built on a hill that overlooks the lake and is quite renowned for its vineyards. Fermented grapes are a recurring theme when walking around the old town, as there are countless restaurants and bars catering to enophiles. To get to the opposite side of the lake, we embarked on a vehicle ferry. That way we had a phenomenal view of the town, as well as the surrounding vineyards. Heading inland again, we soon met up with an old friend. Here, in the southwest of the country, the mighty Danube is still in its infancy. Nevertheless, like all rivers, it is a paragon of tenacity. Throughout the millennia, the Danube has carved a deep water gap. As a result, impressive limestone rocks have been exposed. Visitors can admire this natural work of art from multiple vantage points. Sometimes the view even encompasses a castle. The biggest surprise was when we spotted a small herd of chamois. These animals are mostly associated with the lofty peaks of the Alps, but they also feel home on these cliffs. After descending to the river level, we followed a road along the foot of the limestone walls. Our further route led us through the southwest of the country, towards the myth-enshrouded Black Forest region. On our way we encountered tree-framed waterfalls, castles perched on cliff edges, and narrow backcountry roads. By far the most impressive sight was Burg Hohenzollern. This magnificent castle is enthroned on a hilltop and can be seen from far and wide. Completed in 1867, the castle was built to serve as the family seat of the House of Hohenzollern, a German royal dynasty including princes, electors, kings and emperors.
Last days we encountered quite a bit of rain and fog, and in many places that would be a real bummer. But luckily we are in the Black Forest, a dark and mysterious woodland realm. And here, rather than diminishing the scenery, the moody weather actually enhances it.
Experiencing the Black Forest in this type of weather gave us a good idea of how it first came by its name. When the Romans marched over the Alps, they looked upon a vast woodland to the north. Stretching 160 kilometers in length and up to 50 kilometers in width, this forest seemed almost impenetrable to them. During this time, the area was given the Latin name Silva Nigra, which translates directly to Black Forest, a name that has stuck to this day. Some of the roads leading through the forest are both narrow and winding, which makes them a favorite among road trip enthusiasts. Those interested in history will equally enjoy their time. Most people, of course, come here to experience nature. Many hikes lead to tranquil lakes where one can fully appreciate the clean air and calm surroundings. Less peaceful but equally beautiful are the numerous waterfalls. Some of these are overrun by tourists while others are rarely visited. All of them are embedded in the lush forest though, which makes for a truly enchanting scenery. Having explored large parts of southern Germany, it was now time to drive north. Along our way, we visited Rothenburg ob der Tauber, one of the most romantic towns in the country. Its complicated sounding name translates as Red Castle above the Tauber River. But instead of being famous for its castle, the city is mostly known for its well-preserved old town. Alongside the cobbled streets, the town's most characteristic element is its half-timbered houses. In this type of architecture, the load-bearing timber structure remains visible from the outside. Additionally, the infill between timbers is often decorated. To top it all off, Rothenburg is one of only 4 towns in Germany that still have a completely intact city wall. Visitors can climb up the wooden stairs to the rampart at several points. The approximately 4-kilometer long tower trail leads all the way around the old town and offers a completely different perspective. Traveling westwards, we passed the Felsenmeer Odenwald, a large block field of rounded rocks that were formed by spheroidal weathering. Not far away, the Speyer Cathedral is the largest Romanesque church in the world and a symbol of imperial power. Kings and emperors from various dynasties have found their last resting place here. The exterior of the church is noticeably reddish, which can be explained by the use of red sandstone as a building material. This particular type of sandstone occurs in the west of Germany, in an area called Dahner Felsenland. Here, heavily eroded rock formations protrude from the surrounding forest. Given names such as Devil's Table, Satan's Boulder, or Witch's Mushroom, these formations have always captured people's imagination. In addition to many easy hiking trails, there are also some adventurous paths in the area. But no matter which track you choose, you'll likely be rewarded with a wonderful view. Driving northwest on small roads, we made our way to a bend in the Saar. Another waterway with a meandering course is the Moselle. The hillsides along the river are esteemed as a wine-growing region. The local vineyards have been cultivated for at least 2 millennia, and to this day, most of the work on the steep slopes is done manually. Driving along the river is very pretty and offers wine lovers many opportunities to sample the local produce. The most important town in the region is Trier. Founded by the Romans more than 2,000 years ago, Trier is usually regarded as Germany's oldest city. There are still many remnants of Roman rule, the most impressive of which is the Porta Nigra. This black gate formerly marked the northern entrance to the city. Interestingly, for the Romans, this gate was never black. The original grey sandstone darkened throughout the ages, leading to the gate's appearance and name. As an important Roman city north of the Alps, Trier was also the scene of gladiatorial combat. The local amphitheatre could hold up to 20,000 spectators. Other than its Roman heritage, Trier also boasts buildings dating back to the Middle Ages. Premier among those is the cathedral, which is mesmerizing both on the outside and the inside. Not far from the city, we visited the Teufelsschlucht. This narrow canyon was formed during the last ice age. In the 10,000 years since, mosses and other plants have colonized the rock wall, creating a rather mysterious ambience. Later in the day, we looked upon Burg Eltz. To us, this is Germany's most picturesque castle. As one of only 3 fortresses in the area, it has never been conquered or destroyed. Following careful restoration, the castle delights with half-timbered structures on its outer facade. The side of this 12th century building, bathed in the warm evening sun, was truly memorable. After waking up to a colorful sunrise, we continued our journey on minor roads. In the far west of the country, we visited the Eifel, a low mountain range that is partially protected by a national park. This specific park is still in development, which means that it will be many more years until the ecosystem has been rewilded. Surrounded by the hills of the northern Eifel, the small settlement of Monschau is a real gem. The historic old town is dominated by well-preserved half-timbered houses, many of which are built directly above the river. The appearance of the settlement has hardly changed in 3 centuries, making this a real journey through history. Instead of continuing along the western border, we decided to push into the very heart of Germany. Right now, I am in the untamed wilderness of the Germanic lands. However, if I only take a couple of steps forward, I am back in the safety of the Roman Empire. Well, at least that would have been true 1,800 years ago, because these earthen mounds are a remnant of the limes, a fortified frontier wall that separated the civilized Roman Empire from the barbaric Germanic tribes to the north and east. However, instead of being an impenetrable border wall, the limes was more of a checkpoint to register who entered the empire and, of course, to collect taxes. Beyond the limes, we were surprised by a sudden downpour as we walked through a bog. Our time in the Drachenschlucht was equally wet. The walls of this narrow gorge are entirely covered in moss, and the sound of running water is ever present. Just a stone's throw away, the Wartburg towers on a hill. This castle is both interesting historically as well as geographically, as it almost exactly marks the center of Germany. For a layman such as myself, this looks like any other forest in Germany. I mean, you've got small trees, you've got big trees, leaves on the ground and birds singing. Beautiful, it's a forest. But there is a major difference, because this is a primeval forest, a forest in its natural state, as it would have been hundreds or even thousands of years ago, before humans came and reshaped the land. Currently, this type of primeval forest only remains in tiny pockets, whereas most of the area is covered by near-natural old-growth forests. But it is the explicit aim of Hainisch National Park to re-establish nature to its natural state. Continuing northwards, we entered a highland area called the Harz. This region is home to several natural and human-made sites. One of the most famous is the Hexentanzplatz, a plateau above the Bode Valley that translates to witch's dance floor. Less well known but equally quirky is the Leaning Tower of Bad Frankenhausen, which tilts precariously to the side. Of course, we also visited the Kyffhäuser-Denkmal, one of the few remaining Kaiser Wilhelm monuments. The most surprising sight was the cave dwellings of Langenstein. It almost sounds unbelievable, but in the 1850s, the locals decided to hew 10 flats into the rock. The reason for this desperate measure was an acute housing shortage. Most of the dwellings came with living quarters, a bedroom, a children's room, and even space for some storage. For more than 50 years, young families called these hobbit holes their home, until the last cave dwelling was abandoned in 1916. Most Germans associate the Harz with a specific mountain though. The Brocken is the highest peak in northern Germany, reaching a respectable elevation of 1,142 meters. Even though the summit lies far below what is considered alpine, the local microclimate is similar to that of Iceland. On average, the mountain is veiled in fog on more than 300 days a year, so experiencing clear skies was a real treat. Whereas the Brocken momentarily brought us to Iceland, a nearby church had us rediscover Norway. The Gustav-Adolf-Stabkirche near Goslar is heavily inspired by Norwegian church architecture. Once upon a time, stave churches might have existed in Germany, however, none survived to modern times. Between 1907 and 1908, this Lutheran church was built from spruce trunks and decorated with archaic symbols and carvings. next part of our trip brought us to the shores of the North Sea. Before arriving there, we quickly stopped in the Lüneburger Heide. When in bloom in late summer, this large heathland erupts into color. Next to heath, there are also woodlands and bogs in the area. Many of these can be discovered on easy walks. Others are purposefully a bit more challenging. Our first meeting with the North Sea was rather windy. Luckily, things looked better the next morning when we embarked on a ferry to Norderney. Leaving the mainland behind, we passed through the Wadensee, an intertidal zone characterized by mudflats and wetlands. While it is possible to bring a car to Norderney, we opted to rent e-bikes instead. This allowed us to cruise around on all the smaller trails. It did not take long until we were surrounded by dunes. Aside from the local 19th century lighthouse, the sand dunes are the best way to gain an overview of the landscape. The easternmost part of the island is a national park quiet zone. This meant that we had to continue on foot. Strong winds are very common here, which explains the mostly low vegetation. At first glance, there's not much to see on the island, but it is precisely this natural simplicity that allows one to slow down and appreciate the scenery. Suddenly, the strong wind blew over a threatening rain front. Even though it was fascinating to watch the ominous clouds, the rolling thunder alerted us to our predicament. We were about to get caught in a thunderstorm in a predominantly flat landscape. To avoid being struck by lightning, we swiftly headed back to the trailhead. As quickly as the rain had started, it eased up again, which meant that we also visited the beaches of the island. The next day we took a ferry to Baltrum, another of the 7 East Frisian islands. On our way we passed scores of Habour seals resting on a sandbank. Contrary to Norderney, cars are strictly forbidden on Baltrum. Even bicycles are uncommon, which means that most people simply walk. In total, the island has a width of only 5 kilometers, making it easy to explore on a casual stroll. The landscape of Baltrum does not differ much from its neighboring island, but its small size and car-free environment make it extremely peaceful. Roughly 1 hour after setting out, we arrived at the eastern end. This part of the island is characterized by a large flat beach. In our opinion, a visit to Baltrum is not for adventure seekers or adrenaline junkies, but perfect for anyone who simply wants to slow down. When traveling along Germany's northwestern coast, it is quite rare to get a glimpse of the sea, as all of the land is protected by large dikes. That is why our next destination involved a ferry again. Crossing the open waters, we set course for the country's only deep-sea island. Helgoland, or Heligoland, lies 46 kilometers off the mainland in the German Bight. In 1720, a storm flood tore the island in two, creating the main island and the smaller Düne, which, strictly speaking, makes Helgoland an archipelago. The main attraction of Helgoland is its fabulous sea cliffs. Reaching a height of up to 60 meters, these red sandstone formations are phenomenal. Especially striking is a single sea stack at the island's northern end. At 47 meters high, the Lange Anna is not only a favorite with tourists, but also among seabirds. The same applies to other parts of the cliff. The most common bird on Helgoland is the northern gannet. These birds live in large colonies with hundreds or even thousands of breeding pairs. Their preferred nesting sites are steep cliffs, which give them a lot of protection from predators. Of course, life in such densely packed colonies isn't always harmonious. Compared to other birds, northern gannets are easy to recognize. Their yellow heads and white bodies are very distinct. From close up, one can also spot their striking blue eye rings. As a plunge diver, the northern gannet has a streamlined body perfectly adapted to breaking the water's surface. Once two gannets have linked up for breeding, they greet each other with an elaborate ceremony. Following that, they tend to their feathers. This can be done alone or as a shared activity. Gannets only have a single chick each year, which is naked when newly hatched. After a couple of days, the chick starts growing a white coat that gives it a very woolly appearance. As they get bigger, they no longer fit into the small nests. Most peculiar is their style of sleeping, which very much looks as if they are dead. When they are hungry, chicks will pick on their parent's beak until the adult bird regurgitates a meal. Finally, it looks as if the adults are feeding on the chick, not feeding the chick. Other than gannets, birds such as kittiwakes, razorbills, fulmars and common guillemots populate the cliffs. Towards the evening, the red sandstone started to glow in the light of the setting sun. Enjoying ourselves very much, we sat down and simply took in the view. The next morning, we hopped in a small boat that would bring us over to the neighboring dune. Similar to the larger island, the dune is well known for its wildlife. In this case, the animals are significantly larger though. Growing up to 2.5 meters in length and weighing up to 300 kilograms, grey seals are Germany's largest predator. In the past, these animals were often killed by fishermen who considered them to be competition. Today, however, their numbers are rebounding and the shores of Helgoland have become a favorite breeding site. During the summer, the number of grey seals is limited, but in winter, hundreds of animals will congregate here. On land, seals are often a bit clumsy, but in the water, they are fearsome predators. When they are not chasing fish, they are often seen basking in the sun. Whereas the adults remain in a semi-alert state, the youngsters prefer to play fight. In addition to grey seals, the same beaches are also frequented by Habour seals. Fascinatingly, both species tend to tolerate each other. The best way to tell them apart is to look at their faces. Habour seals have a very round head, whereas that of grey seals is much more elongated. A grown-out grey seal is also significantly larger and heavier than its relative. In contrast to Helgoland, most other islands in the German North Sea are extremely flat. Some of these, the so-called Halligen, barely reach 1 meter above the high tide. During storm surges, they are almost completely submerged. The largest North Frisian island is Sylt. To get there, we boarded a car-carrying train that brought us across a large dike. Generally speaking, Sylt does not differ much from the other Frisian islands. It is characterized by sand dunes, low shrubby vegetation and long beaches. Geographically, however, the island is interesting as it marks the northernmost point of Germany. Throughout the day, we visited different beaches, had a look at the typical thatch roof buildings, and gazed at the receding water of the Bodensee. To get back to the mainland, we boarded the train again, only this time we had to drive backwards for more than 200 meters. the entire northwestern coastline, it was now time to head towards the Baltic Sea. Looking over to Denmark, the scenery was very calming. In general, the landscape is not overly captivating, but the region tends to be well liked by holidaygoers. Traveling along the coast, we visited both wetlands as well as forested areas. One of the more unusual places was the Gespensterwald. Translating to Ghost's Forest, this small wood is fabled for its deformed beech trees with twisted branches. While driving through the fields, we also spotted a flock of common cranes. These birds are known for their elaborate mating dances, as well as their habit of forming migratory flocks of up to several thousand birds. On our way, we also visited some cities. Lübeck, for example, is renowned for its brick architecture. In the 13th and 14th centuries, Lübeck was the capital of the Hanseatic League, and as such, one of the most important cities in Northern Europe. Overshadowing all the other buildings is the Holstentor. This large gate used to be part of the city wall before the town outgrew its former dimensions. Further to the east, we arrived in Stralsund. As a founding member of the Hanseatic League, the city achieved considerable prosperity. Multiple majestic churches bear witness to this golden age of seafaring trade. In the light of the setting sun, the brick buildings glowed intensely. Furthermore, Stralsund is the gateway to Rügen, the largest German island. Heading as far north as Cap Arcona, we visited the island's prominent char cliffs. These cliffs are not only popular among humans, but also with birds. The crag martin, for example, finds ideal conditions to build its nest here. This is not without danger, as the char cliffs are prone to collapse due to erosion. The best view of Rügen's coast opens up on a boat trip around Jasmund National Park. In comparison to a walk along the shore, this allows one to take in the full width of the landscape. The highest and most famous formation is the Königsstuhl. This char cliff towers 118 meters above the Baltic Sea. For centuries, this scenery has been a favorite among artists, but the coast of Rügen is in a constant state of change. With every storm, parts of the cliff collapse. That means that many historic paintings show formations that have long been lost to the sea. With our trip through Germany quickly coming to an end, we decided to push south from the Baltic Sea, skirting far around Berlin. Another highlight of our journey was the visit to the Spreewald. This large inland delta of the Spree was shaped during the last ice age. In addition to the natural river arms, humans built more than 200 canals for irrigation purposes. This has created a water-rich forest landscape whose likeness cannot be found anywhere else in the country. There is more than one option to explore this aquatic maze, but all of them involve some type of vessel. We decided to rent a canoe, with which we could navigate the waterways at our leisure. Focusing on these smaller canals, we experienced the Spreewald as exceptionally serene. One of the more adventurous elements of our canoe trip was having to pass through a lock. These are used to overcome the differences in height between waterways. Alternatively, one can sometimes use ramps to the same effect. Towards the end of the day, we visited Germany's most picturesque bridge. The Rakotsbrücke was built solely as an element of landscape architecture. On calm days, the structure reflects perfectly in a pond. The next morning, we spotted a young wolf cross the road before making our way to Görlitz, Germany's easternmost town. This city is only separated from Poland by a small river. Despite its charm, Görlitz is not yet visited by too many tourists. Surrounded by the old town of a historic city, our journey concluded just as it had begun. After 8 weeks, having driven more than 8,500 kilometers, our road trip through Germany came to its end. Too often we Germans view our own country as mundane and not worthy of exploration. We will travel halfway around the globe, but tend to ignore the wonders in our own backyard. During this trip, we were repeatedly surprised by Germany's diverse scenery. Between the cultural heritage, wonderful wildlife and natural variety, we truly delighted in the beauty of the country we call home.